Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Midnight Post. We are doing this second episode today, and I am joined once again by Jason.
Hello, everybody.
And we are going to be discussing something today that has fascinated, I think, both of us for a long time, and that's cattle mutilation. Um, it sounds weird when you say it like that, I guess, but it's more the mystery surrounding it. Jason, when was the first time you heard of this sort of thing?
A few years ago, actually, I think you and I were talking about it, or talking about other cryptozoology, and it got brought up.
Yeah, it's one of those things that is so mysterious, and unlike the chupacabra in the first episode we did, there is a plethora of evidence and photo evidence, I guess I should say specifically, of this sort of phenomena. And I mean, lots of thousands upon thousands of dollars lost in cattle deaths. I mean, for some of these farmers, this is their livelihood. So they're not quite as likely to be faking this, I would say, as somebody with a chupacabra supposedly captured.
No, definitely. Couldn't be faked.
So basically, just to get everyone kind of up to speed here, um, the general overview of this is basically farmers will go out in their fields and they'll find their cattle dead, and oftentimes, we use the word mutilated. Organs will be missing: eyes, tongue, ears, genitalia, udders, anything like that. It's very odd, and usually it's surgical precision. I mean, we're talking about perfect circles around the areas and things like that in a lot of these cases. And sometimes they're drained completely of blood, which is kind of a funny tie-in with the chupacabra myth. But this one, a little more strange, I guess you would say.
Yeah.
There have even been reported cases of horses being mutilated. So um, they've speculated on the cause of this being, obviously, some people have tried to say wild predators, even though we've kind of ruled that out for the most part. I feel like um, government experimentations, aliens, satanic cults, anything like that. I mean, it's pretty odd. And speaking of pretty odd things, so here I'm based out of Springfield, Missouri, and ironically, one of the first cases that we've had in modern times of animal mutilation, or cattle mutilation specifically, was right here in Springfield in 1973. I'd never known about that until I researched this. Jason, have you ever heard of that sort of thing around this area? I mean, I
No.
don't know if we get a ton of strange activity, but
No, nothing as far as this goes. Um, I would have never thought it reached us all the way over here either.
yeah, I mean, it is kind of a rural farming area in general. I mean, there's a lot of that. It's more livestock around here than anything, I believe. But it's not something that you would expect. I've seen strange things in the sky from time to time out here, um, and here I go. I guess I'm kind of already attributing it to alien intervention, but I've seen strange things in the sky around here, especially with the southwest part of Missouri is not quite as lit up at night. I mean, granted, in Springfield it is, there's a lot of light pollution, but my parents are from about an hour north of where I'm at, and out there, I mean, you could see the stars really well, and I'd seen some weird stuff. And actually, Jason, I don't think I've ever asked you about this. Have you ever seen anything in the sky that was like
I
out of
actually,
place?
I actually have. I was actually driving from my parents back down to Springfield. My parents live about 3 hours. We'll call it northeast of here. On the way back, I saw. How do I put this? Like blue blue trail lights in circles. As I was coming back, it was over a ridge. There was kind of like three of them in a pattern, and then I went down the ridge, and when I came back up, they were completely gone. No signs of them, no sounds, no nothing. I had my windows down in my car. It just these strange blue circular lights, and then all of a sudden they're gone.
Hmm. Yeah, and a lot of times that's kind of what happens. It leaves just as quickly as it shows up. I don't know. And so that just gives you kind of a taste that there is activity in this area specifically, but I mean, I think there's, some sort of activity everywhere. Um, so specifically, this case here in Springfield, I want to touch on that just for a minute. So I'll give you kind of an overview. It was the summer of 1973. Ron and Paula Watson, two farmers in Springfield, Missouri. They witnessed something that would change their lives forever. They said they saw a green cone-shaped craft, and next to the craft were two silver little beings standing over a large black cow. And I actually have a quote from her. She said, "I told Ron, my God, they've got a cow. What are they doing to it? It had its eyes open and tongue was like hanging out a bit. They said it just lay there and didn't, but I said it just lay there and it didn't move." Uh, I think I botched that quote, but that's okay. But it just laid there and didn't move. That's what she said. So, you know, that one is a bit more far fetched. She's actually talking about seeing beings like alien creatures standing outside, looking at the cow. She described in detail how she saw the aliens running their hands over the cow and then inspecting it with their long fingers before they floated it into their large ship in the distance. So, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear a case like that?
Uh, for me, it's the hardship of the beings, but at the same time, with prior knowledge of some of these cattle mutilations, when you rule out all the plausible, you're left with the unthinkable. And what is the unthinkable? Which is kind of aliens. So,
Yeah, I mean,
it's been ruled out for almost everything else. So you have to
yeah,
at least consider it.
yeah, exactly. And I mean, when you first hear something like that, you're like, wow, that's crazy. That could never happen, but then again, like you said, when you rule out everything else, who knows? It's definitely possible. Um, I don't know if they would be doing something like that on purpose for attention or whatever, but I mean, these sorts of incidences have gotten the attention of even the FBI. They have an entire database of these unsolved cattle murders. It petrified farmers. They had no idea why it was happening or when it was going to happen. Like that's financial hardship out of nowhere. They spend money on these cows to buy them, to sell them, to, I guess you could say harvest them, for hamburger and things like that. You can tell I'm definitely quite the farmer, being that I don't quite have the vocabulary of the livestock industry. But I think you know what I'm saying. Like this isn't something they're just going to make up for fun, or go out and shoot their cows in the head. And even if they were, the evidence doesn't line up with that. A lot of this is surgical precision that we're talking about. Not every case, but some of these high strangeness cases, you see that a lot. There were incidences all over the place. In 1974, they were in South Dakota, Colorado, Kansas, Nevada. There were even cases in Canada. I mean, when
Yeah.
there's something this widespread, it gets some attention.
And that's the thing to consider too, is the vast scope of where all this happens. It's not centralized in one area. It's spread out over many states, all the way even to a separate country. So it also kind of eliminates the idea of like a satanic cult, something you brought up earlier. If it's a satanic cult, you would think that only that area's farmers would be kind of concerned, but now it's spread
Yeah.
to everywhere at any time.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, it's not like we have cults, all over the place doing the same thing. I mean, it's possible, but in the 70s, I don't know if they would be quite that organized. But even especially back then, they seemed to be very isolated in their own little communities, their own little cult, I guess.
Right, it's
Um,
not like you just hopped on the internet and you called and you told your buddies, "Hey, here's what we did and here's some photos." You,
yeah,
it's in the 70s. You had to go there.
yeah. And in 1975, the Colorado U.S. Senator Floyd Haskell, he actually pleaded with the FBI to become involved. They had more than 130 cases in that state alone. Farmers had taken to arming themselves out of fear because, they maybe it was coming for them next. They had no way to know. They didn't know what was doing it or
Yeah,
why.
I want to say it was some like 8,000 cattle just in Colorado.
Yeah, yeah. Over the course of that decade, I believe, maybe into the 80s.
Yeah.
Um, so we're going to get into a little bit more of the details of the mutilations. So this might be a little we'll just say viewer discretion advised. I might throw some images up here to kind of go along with it, so you know that we do have photographic evidence. It's not hard to find. You can just Google it. Um, but so, for example, when a cow decomposes, the vegetable matter contained in one of its four stomachs usually makes the animal bloat.
Mm-hmm.
So, as moisture leaves the body, it starts to deflate, causing the exposed edges of the animal to stay hard and darkened. So, to somebody who doesn't know what they're looking at, it could look like a burn. But a lot of these carcasses, they're examined by coroners and medical professionals, or farmers. I mean, even if you're not a veterinarian, when you're a farmer who sees these cows day in and day out in all states, in all matters of being, they know what they're looking at. And there was one coroner, for example, in Wyoming. The cow had a 1 millimeter diameter hole in the center of its head. No evidence of a gunshot wound. Something was injected into the brain to kill the cow, is what they speculate. They don't know exactly what it was. Sometimes the cow's alive, sometimes it's dead when the mutilation occurs. One cow dug a hole in the ground using its head, kind of like flopping it back and forth, digging it into the ground. So that gave the examiners clues that it was probably alive when the mutilation happened. And that one in particular, let's see, it lost one eye, one ear, the tongue, and the rectal area taken out. Nothing else had moved. The rest of the body completely was still, only the head. So it was possibly paralyzed. They gave it something that would paralyze it from the neck down. It's very interesting. I don't know. I mean, again, I kind of lean toward the alien theory. And so who knows what sort of, technology they might have to do that. So, I mean, so Jason, one of the things that I kind of tasked you with is coming up with why. And that, I think I probably gave you the hardest task of all, speculating on why this could be happening and who could be doing it.
Yeah,
So,
and it
what do
was
you
kind
think?
of difficult because we have so many different cases, and some with very precise skill sets used for the mutilations, and then some that are, we'll call it less so. Um, so when you look at the less so ones, when they're harmed, but it doesn't seem to have a surgical precision to it, that leads you to believe something along the lines of a copycat. But at the same time, why? Because they still have a lot of the organs missing. They'll still have some of the eyes missing. There's several cases where the blood is still completely drained, but yet there's no evidence of a blood trail or even a track of who or whatever caused this in a 100-foot radius. So there's still oddities about each case, even though some have such precision to them and some almost seem like an amateur did it. But the other thing was almost 90% of all cases were in cows that were 4 to 5 years old, almost a prime real estate, if you will. So that leads you to believe that whoever or whatever is intentionally waiting for a certain time period, and that falls back into the why. You could go with the alien theory, which, okay, they're studying different creatures because while the cattle has the most mutilations, upon my research of finding this, was that there are other creatures that have been surgically mutilated, if you will, just not to the extent of cattle. So maybe there's something different about cattle. One of our prime food groups comes strictly from cattle. So if an alien is going to study us, then it'd make perfect sense to study our largest food group. But then let's flip it to another why. Let's say you have a hard time believing in the alien theory. Okay, why would somebody do this? Well, around this time, mad cow disease was spreading like crazy. So it is plausible that there was some entity, whether it be government or private, that was experimenting to see if they could cause mad cow disease, cure it, um, infect cattle with it, and as the disease progressed, figure out a solution to it. whether that be a cure, whether that be understanding how it spreads throughout the body. But the why is very hard in general. Um, it
So
there's no one solid piece of evidence that says the government wanted to do this because blank.
yeah,
So
and
go
when we
ahead.
talk about the government doing it, are we talking about like with the mad cow research and everything? Have you considered why they would be doing it to civilian cattle and not like breeding their own,
Yeah, and that's
and being much less you know out in the open about it?
yeah, and that's something else to look at. I'm glad you brought that up because there are state-funded cattle farms throughout the country. So why not use their own? Why cost? I have it pulled up here. Upwards of over $1 million over the course of 7 years to civilians. Why would you do that? Why not experiment with some of your own cattle that you have that you're funding that potentially would harm farmers' economy a lot less, if at all. And plus, you could have a better control group. So
Yeah,
why would they do that? Why would they go about the civilian? I agree with, which pushes me away from that, pushes me away from the government idea. I just feel like if they were going to do any form of experimentation with cattle, they would do it in a more controlled environment, which pushes me towards abnormal reasons behind this. Um, Satanic
yeah,
cult, yeah, but it's still that widespreadness keeps pushing me back towards, um, in a way, almost either a oh, extraterrestrial, we'll call it, sense, or even a supernatural sense, but definitely not just Joe Schmo doing it, and definitely not the government doing it.
yeah. And I think too, with the government idea is that a lot of people, well, I say a lot, a good number have reported seeing black helicopters over their properties, shortly after the incident happens or after they find the cow. Or sometimes before they find the cow, because these people have huge farms. It's not like, usually most of them will drive the perimeter, daily just to check on everything, make sure everything's okay. And that's usually when they find the carcass. But they've reported seeing these black helicopters. And a lot of times, too, with UFO sightings, black helicopters accompany that, or sometimes even jets. Like the government is aware that they're here and they're just monitoring them. So that's one thing. I mean, you could think, uh, see, it seems so ridiculous. It almost seems as ridiculous as an alien doing it. To imagine the idea of a black helicopter landing in some farmer's pasture and mutilating a cow, especially
Right.
thinking that the cow's actually going to stand there while the helicopter lands.
Well, and then the
You know,
other thing too, with these sightings of these helicopters, most, if not all, didn't have, so to say, a spotlight. Um, they didn't have any plausible reasoning that that craft was observing that specific incident. And that's what I find hard to believe, is that the government would be sitting there monitoring such an event, especially if farmers are finding it, I mean, within 24 hours. How did the government find it, and why were they overhead? It's
right,
more plausible that they were overhead as a coincidence.
right, yeah. And so I think on that note, we're just about out of time here, so we're probably going to end it here. But then we're going to pick up with part two of this episode next week and kind of cover, a little bit more detail about what is happening to these cattle, and more speculation on the why as well, and kind of, just round this out as much as we can. Like I said, there is a lot of evidence. There's a lot of stuff to go over, and I don't want to just ignore a bunch of it and not be able to kind of talk about some of this stuff. So we're gonna end it here. I want to thank Jason again. Thank you all for listening. Jason, do you have any final thoughts for this episode?
No, I think we'll save more for our next episode.
All right, sounds good. So we hope to see you all then. Thanks again for watching. This is the Midnight Post. I'm your host, Jeff. and we will catch you in the next episode.
See you soon.